Tommy Broughan,
I'm delighted to have the brief opportunity to comment on the appointment of this new government, this rehashed and I think still very feeble government. On a personal level, I'm sure that Taoiseach Vardakar and his ministers will find their elevation satisfying, and of course I wish the new Taoiseach and his ministerial team all the very best in their new and indeed old portfolios. But there's no indication, I think, that this restructured government with its minus 22-seat minority will give any better direction and care to the Irish people than the earlier Fine Gael-led austerity government since 2011. Last May 2016, in a speech on the formation of the government of the 32nd Dáil, I called it a sham administration, providing cover for his Fianna Fáil puppet masters to pretend that they and their Conservative Fine Gael partners were both a government and an opposition at the same time. I note that at least Taoiseach Vardakar hasn't ruled out a Fine Gael-Fianna Fáil coalition in the future, but hopefully Dáil numbers in the 33rd Dáil will not permit Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to swap places and carry on the current charade after the next general election. Indeed, the ambition of all parties on the left of this House should be to work towards the day when both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will be together in opposition in this House. Of course, I did call repeatedly last can for a designated Brexit minister over the past year, and I do welcome the fact that Minister Coveney has been given that task as part of the Foreign Affairs and Trade portfolio. But it's very disappointing and regrettable that Minister Coveney has chosen to walk away from the Department of Housing. The most telling judgment on his tenure in housing is that the new Minister, Deputy Owen Murphy, is to carry out a 3-month review of rebuilding Ireland with a brief mention of further housing policy solutions. I mean, I think that's a testament to your failure, Minister Coveney. I also believe that all of those who warned against merging back the Departments of Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform are correct, are totally correct. One of the few good initiatives of the 2011-2016 government was the establishment of the Department of Expenditure and Reform. This change, of course, is happening just as the Budgetary Oversight Committee, Las Concorla, is being appointed. Budgetary Oversight Office is being appointed to invigilate state spending and report to the Budgetary Oversight Committee. I think any committed, serious government would keep all aspects of expenditure under close scrutiny, and in particular, proper attention was just beginning to be given at last to the very high cost of tax expenditures, such as the R&D tax credit, which we were informed today costs us $750 million every year. My colleague, Deputy Dáil, has addressed some aspects of the justice portfolio, but it was being mooted that the only way of changing the culture of the Department of Justice was to separate the security, if you like, Home Affairs function from the Justice and Reform function. But this is something, of course, the Government tonight has chosen not to do. So once again, Fianna Fáil is the anchor of this Fine Gael administration, and the Conservative dead hand of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil together have resolutely refused to implement a housing emergency programme to house the tens of thousands of families on housing lists and in hotels and guest houses. And on this day, the day you were elected, Taoiseach Vardakar, many of us got calls from mothers of families in a desperate situation, facing eviction in the next few weeks, your HAP programme not working in the Dublin region, and we've had no hope on this area. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael together have refused to address the urgent needs of the 660,000 citizens on health waiting lists, or to finally implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. You have together starved the education sector of resources and opposed pay equality for young teachers. From 2008, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael together, from their joint and continuing support of the blanket bank guarantee, you have allowed public investment to fall below minimum depreciation levels and allowed our infrastructure to wither and to fall into decay. And I noticed, Taoiseach Vardakar, you hadn't a word to say today in your introductory speech on the government about our infrastructure. I was no admirer, of course, of the Kenny-Noonan administrations, which simply carried on the Cowan-Lenihan programmes of needless, deep cuts and austerity, which seriously damaged so many of our people. It was laughable yesterday listening to journalists and some members of this House waxing lyrical about the so-called achievements of Kenny and Noonan. Their performance at EU level was pitiful, and their cowardice in not standing up to Chancellor Merkel and the EU Commission has left Ireland with an incredible and dangerously high national debt, and we very rarely see our journalists writing about that, by the way. Just this afternoon, the Chief Economist of the Department of Finance told us at the Budgetary Oversight Committee that national debt still stands at just over 100% of GNI star. Indeed, Irish citizens per capita have one of the highest national debts on the planet, and there are continuing grave worries about the necessary refinancing of those huge stacks of our debt in 2018-2020. I think Minister Paschal Donohoe knows a little bit about that. But that is a true legacy of Messrs Kenny and Noonan. Deputy Leo Varadkar, of course, was always at the heart of this policy failure. As I mentioned a few weeks ago in a health debate with Minister Harris, Deputy Varadkar managed to ghost his way through 3 major departments since 2011 without having any discernible positive impact on public policy. I'm aware from my own work that you did at least take a small interest in road safety issues at the Department of Transport, but there was very little legislative change to make our roads safer until you had long departed that department. It would be also fair, I think, to judge, and I don't agree with my colleague Deputy Dáil on that score. It would also be fair to judge that Deputy Vardakar made no impact whatsoever on the health sector, either in terms of budgetary expansion for additional resources or in implementing the totally misconceived Fine Gael health insurance plan. What happened to that plan, by the way, Minister Vardakar? Taoiseach Vardakar. Indeed, Deputy Varadkar's tenure in health, it only had the one consolation that he wasn't Senator or former Minister O'Reilly. It was striking this morning, by the way, that the Taoiseach picked out the one thing in health, which of course was a policy initiated by Deputy Shortall during her tenure, as the only thing that could be shown from your tenure. Over the past year in social protection questions, I repeatedly asked you about the restoration of pensions, especially for senior women workers and retirees after your cruel 2012 budget cuts, but you have steadfastly opposed the restoration and indeed any changes to ease the cutbacks on lone parent families introduced by the 2011-2016 government. Your recent campaign against social welfare fraud has no credibility, as so many deputies have said, because in the 10 years of this House I never heard you once refer to tax evasion and tax avoidance, and we know even from basic reports from Revenue at the Public Accounts Committee, of which twice I was a member, that tax evasion is perhaps 100 times the size that we know about. It's perhaps 100 times the size of social welfare fraud. Many of my constituents also found your comments in contesting the Fine Gael leadership that you wanted to represent people who get up early in the morning utterly disrespectful and revealing the arrogance of a classic neoliberal. Taoiseach Vardakar, you spoke earlier of a republic of opportunity, and that reminds me of the old 1990s Fine Gael refrain of you were going to provide ladders for the people. Well, the ladders, yeah, besides people who went off and got a ladder, put it on their bike and went cleaning windows, well, the ladders were then just a dog whistle for the richest and most powerful vested interests in Irish society. So in conclusion, while I wish the Ministers well in their portfolio, this is not the government Ireland needs in this very dramatic Brexit Trump era. Taoiseach Vardakar or Deputy Martin, you should just call a general election as soon as possible and let the people give us a proper government.